The deep bite of winter had clamped down upon the valley, not with the usual gentle smother of snow, but with an iron fist of ice and an unending hunger. For 3 months, the sun had been a pale rumor in a bruised sky, its warmth a forgotten legend. The small settlement of Oak Haven, nestled against the unforgiving peaks of the Ironwood Range, was a ghost of its former self, its clapboard buildings groaning under drifts that dwarfed even the tallest men. Desperation, a chill wind itself, seeped into every crack and crevice, stripping hope like bark from a dead tree. The general store, once a hub of coarse laughter and illicit trade, stood silent, its windows dark, shelves long since emptied of even the smallest comfort. Outside, the few remaining horses were gaunt shadows, their breath pluming like sorrowful prayers in the relentless cold. The grip of federal agents had preceded the winter's harshest freezes, their strict enforcement of the Volstead Act having long since choked the last legal gasp from every distillery, brewery, and saloon within 100 miles, turning a once thriving regional economy into a parched desert of prohibition. Yet, amidst this tableau of slow, certain demise, something impossible, something utterly forbidden, wafted through the air, an anomaly that defied the very laws of their frigid existence and the decrees of the distant government. It was a scent, rich and undeniable, a perfume of life and warmth that had no business lingering in such a desolate place. It was the deep, earthy tang of fermenting grapes, a robust, almost sweet aroma that carried with it the distant promise of sun-drenched vineyards and the convivial cheer of harvest. It was wine. Not the sour, stale breath of an empty cask, but the living, breathing essence of a cellar, vibrant and potent, undeniably illegal. This impossible scent, delicate yet pervasive, curled through the frigid air, sometimes stronger near the desolate mining roads that snaked towards the craggy mountainsides, sometimes barely a whisper carried on the punishing gusts. The townsfolk, huddled in their freezing homes, occasionally caught it, a fleeting, maddening tease that felt like a cruel jest from a malevolent spirit. Old Widow Mallory, her hands gnarled with cold and age, swore she smelled it near the old path that led to the abandoned mine shaft on the north slope, a place no sane person had ventured in years, let alone during this brutal freeze, and certainly not a place to hide contraband. Her neighbor, the gruff but equally starved blacksmith, simply grunted in disbelief, rubbing his frost-nipped ears. "It's the cold playing tricks on your mind, woman." And the agents cleaned out every drop worth having a year ago. There's no wine left in this entire territory, legal or otherwise, let alone fresh fermenting in a mountain cave, but the scent persisted, a phantom whisper of abundance in a world defined by its crushing scarcity and its legally enforced dryness, a mystery as profound and unsettling as the endless winter itself. It was a promise, unspoken, of a warmth no hearth in Oak Haven could provide, a luxury so far beyond their grasp that merely imagining it felt like a betrayal of their collective suffering and their enforced abstinence. Its presence was a question, an urgent, silent demand for explanation in a town that had long ceased to ask questions, content only to brace against the inevitable. The aroma of illegal warmth, a tangible ghost, dared them to hope for the impossible. The grip of the winter had tightened its hold on Oak Haven, squeezing the last vestiges of life from its struggling inhabitants. Stores of dried meat and salted fish, once carefully rationed, had dwindled to nothing but a memory. The last sack of flour had been portioned out weeks ago, each meager spoonful a solemn sacrament. Children cried with a low, persistent whimper that bespoke a hunger too deep for tears, and their mothers, hollow-eyed and gaunt, could offer little solace beyond the promise of a spring that felt impossibly distant. The town's reliance on the seasonal resupply trains had proven to be its undoing, but the deeper rot had set in long before the snows, with the zealous enforcement of prohibition. The saloons that had once bolstered the local economy, providing jobs and a place for weary men to spend their hard-earned coin, were now shuttered, empty shells. The illicit stills that had sprung up in their wake had been ruthlessly pursued and dismantled by federal agents, leaving a cultural and economic void that the meager, legal trade could not fill. Any semblance of a cash economy had evaporated, leaving Oak Haven crippled even before the first snowflake fell. The designated leaders, a council of merchants and landowners led by the portly and self-important councilman Thorne, had proven utterly useless. Their initial reassurances had curdled into panicked pronouncements, then into a resigned, silent impotence, their authority undermined by a law they could not enforce, yet dared not defy. Thorne, who usually held sway over the town's meager economy through his control of the general store and its ever-dwindling stock, now merely wrung his hands, his face a pale, pasty mask of fear and self-pity, the very thought of any contraband a terror to his reputation. "There's nothing more to be done," he had declared in the last town meeting, his voice cracking with a manufactured despair that poorly concealed his personal terror. "We must pray for a thaw, and for the dry agents to overlook us. God help us all." His words had brought no comfort, only a deeper chill to the already freezing hall, a reminder of both their hunger and their legal bind. The town well, its timbers groaning, was now frozen solid a foot below the surface, meaning the daily chore of chipping away ice for water had become an epic struggle against a relentless adversary. Disease, too, had begun its quiet, creeping march, preying on the weakened bodies and dampened spirits. A hacking cough rippled through the few houses still clinging to a flicker of warmth, and the burial grounds, once reserved for the truly ancient, now saw the grim procession of small, bundled forms wrapped in linen too thin for the biting air. Amidst the rising despair, only old Jem, a prospector whose face was a roadmap of sun and wind, had offered a different kind of warning months ago. He had sat by the communal fire, a pipe clenched between his few remaining teeth, shaking his head as the first heavy snows began to fall. "This ain't no ordinary winter, I tell you, and this prohibition ain't no ordinary thirst. You prepare for a feast and ignore the lean times, you'll find yourselves gnawing on leather come spring, and wishing for a drop of what you outlawed." His words, dismissed as the ramblings of an old fool, had been met with scornful laughter from Thorn and his cronies. "Jem, you've been too long in the sun, or perhaps too long without your demon drink," Thorn had scoffed, waving a dismissive hand. "The law is the law, and the trains will come. They always do now, with the trains a forgotten dream and starvation a waking nightmare." Jem's ignored prophecy hung heavy in the air, a bitter reminder of the community's collective optimism, blind arrogance, and the crushing weight of a law that had promised purity but delivered only destitution. As the despair deepened, and the impossible, forbidden aroma of fermenting wine continued to tantalize the starving populace, a reluctant whisper began to circulate through Oak Haven. It started with the children, whose senses were often sharper than their elders, less dulled by hunger and hardened cynicism. Young Marin, a girl barely 10, had sworn she'd seen a tendril of steam rising from the ground near the old North Slope mine entrance, even as blizzards raged, and she insisted it smelled like the forbidden fruit her grandfather used to describe. Her brother, Thomas, dismissed it as mist, but Marin insisted it felt different, carried a faint, sweet, and dangerous sweetness on the air. Then, the whisper grew louder, carried by those who had ventured further in their desperate search for fuel or trapped game. They spoke of a peculiar warmth near the base of the craggy, wind-battered mountain, a warmth that seemed to emanate from the very stone itself, and with the warmth, that insistent, maddening fragrance of what they knew to be illegal. It led them, invariably, to the property of Barnaby Croft, the quiet, solitary man who had arrived in Oak Haven nearly 2 years prior. Barnaby, a stranger with a weathered face and hands scarred by a lifetime of unseen labor, had purchased a small, undesirable plot of land near the mouth of the abandoned mine, a place the town had deemed worthless and too remote for honest enterprise. He had toiled ceaselessly, often through the night, his lantern a lone star against the darkness, his presence a constant source of amusement and, increasingly, suspicion for the townsfolk. They had watched him, often with open mockery, as he cleared the land, not for planting, but for digging. He had spent months excavating, shoring up, and reinforcing, seemingly carving out a vast cavity within the mountain itself. "What's the old fool doing?" Councilman Thorn had once bellowed from his porch, to the agreement of his fellow merchants, casting a wary eye towards the remote property. "Building a root cellar big enough for an army? Or perhaps he thinks to brew moonshine right under the agents' noses. He'll bring trouble down on all of us." The laughter had been hearty, cruel, and unanimous, but underneath it, a tremor of fear for potential federal reprisal. Barnaby, then, had ignored them, his gaze fixed on the task at hand, his movements precise and unhurried. He never spoke much, answering polite inquiries with a nod and a soft word, and open jeers with a quiet turning of his back, refusing to acknowledge their suspicions or fears. Now, the impossible scent of wine, that tantalizing promise of life and illegal indulgence, seemed to originate from Barnaby's property, from the very mouth of the secret cave he had so painstakingly carved into the mountainside. It was a truth so outlandish, so contrary to everything they believed, and so dangerous in the era of Prohibition, that many still struggled to accept it. but the evidence, subtle yet persistent, was becoming undeniable. The warm, living smell was a beacon, a challenge to their starving reality and a defiance of the law. It mocked their former scorn and their self-righteous adherence to the Volstead Act, quietly yet unequivocally, exposing their arrogance in the stark light of their own impending doom. The thought that their salvation might lie with the man they had ridiculed, in a project they had openly scorned and legally condemned, was a bitter pill to swallow, but a pill that necessity might soon force down their throats. Barnaby Croft had arrived in Oak Haven not with a flourish, but with the quiet dignity of a man seeking to bury a past and cultivate a future, however humble, far from the prying eyes of the law. 2 years prior, a single wagon, loaded with little more than hand tools and a few tightly bound bundles, had creaked into the dusty main street. His face, already etched with lines that spoke of both sun and sorrow, held a weary stoicism. He had lost his wife and their small vineyard, swallowed whole by a flash flood in a distant valley, an event that tragically coincided with the nation's decision to outlaw his family's age-old craft. The grief was compounded by the sudden criminalization of his life's work, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back and the indelible, now illegal, knowledge of the earth and the vine. His arrival had been met with the usual frontier curiosity, quickly fading into indifference when it became clear he wasn't a prospector chasing gold, nor a merchant seeking profit, nor a bootlegger looking for easy marks. He had simply bought the desolate patch of land at the base of the North Slope, a place considered barren and unproductive, unsuitable for farming or ranching, a place conveniently remote from the main thoroughfare and the watchful eyes of federal agents. The townsfolk, particularly those who prided themselves on their shrewdness, had chuckled at his apparent naivete, unaware of the true, illicit purpose of his quiet purchase. A man planting grapes on that rock pile, Councilman Thorne had sneered to the local gossip, Mrs. Peabody. He'll be lucky to grow weeds, let alone anything worth a dime in this dry country. But Barnaby hadn't intended to plant grapes in the harsh, dry soil above ground. His vision, born of generations of understanding the land and adapted to the new, unforgiving legal landscape, was deeper, literally. He saw not the rocky surface, but the steady, unchanging temperature of the mountain's interior, the natural insulation of the stone, the perfect, unobservable environment for a secret operation. He saw the latent warmth, the protection from the savage winters and blistering summers, and, crucially, the impenetrable secrecy it offered from the enforcement of Prohibition. His first weeks were spent not socializing, but walking the perimeter of his land, his calloused fingers brushing against stone and soil, his eyes reading the subtle signs of groundwater and rock strata, and assessing the best angles for a hidden entrance. He studied the prevailing winds, the snowmelt patterns, the very breath of the mountain. He made careful measurements, scratched calculations onto worn scraps of parchment, and drew diagrams that seemed cryptic to any casual observer, concealing the true nature of his construction. He moved with a purpose that was both methodical and deeply intuitive, a man guided by an inner compass that pointed toward something far beyond the immediate horizon, towards a defiance of unjust law. He began to dig, not a simple trench, but a precise, sloping shaft into the mountainside, shoring it with timbers he hauled himself from the sparse, higher forests, always under the cloak of darkness when possible. The work was grueling, solitary, and relentless, often continuing by the flickering light of a lantern long after the town had gone to sleep, a secretive dance with the earth. He was building not merely a cellar, but an extension of the earth itself, a place where time and temperature could be harnessed, where the delicate, now illegal, process of fermentation could proceed undisturbed, shielded from the caprices of the harsh frontier climate and the long arm of the law. His initial resources were meager, just enough to purchase the land and a few basic tools, but his most valuable asset was his knowledge, a deep, abiding connection to the ancient craft that had sustained his family for centuries, a craft he was now forced to practice in the shadows. Barnaby Croft's seemingly peculiar and illicit endeavors were not born of idle fancy or the ramblings of a madman, but from a profound, inherited wisdom, a craft passed down through generations who had learned to coax life from difficult lands, and, often, from difficult circumstances. His family, originally from the sun-drenched valleys of Europe, had carried their wine-making traditions with them across the ocean, adapting their methods to the new, often harsher, realities of the American frontier, even learning how to maintain their craft through periods of strict local regulations. They had always sought out the unique microclimates and geological formations that could replicate the stable conditions essential for viticulture and fermentation, and, now, for absolute secrecy. His grandfather, a man of quiet strength and unparalleled patience, had taught him that the true heart of winemaking lay not merely in the grape, but in the earth itself, in its ability to offer consistent temperatures year-round, insulated from the wild swings of the surface world and the prying eyes of government agents. The mountain, his grandfather had once said, his voice raspy with age and wisdom, she is the oldest cooper, shaping the finest barrels of all. We merely learn to listen to her breath, and she will hide our secrets. Barnaby had internalized this lesson, observing how natural caves and underground springs maintained a steady chill in summer and a surprising warmth in winter, all while remaining unseen. This understanding was the bedrock of his audacious plan to circumvent the federal ban. He had spent years apprenticing, learning not just the crushing and pressing, but the construction of deep, earth-sheltered cellars, mastering the art of ventilation, drainage, and structural integrity, all with an eye towards concealment. He knew precisely how far to dig to reach the stable thermal mass of the mountain rock, how to angle the entrance to catch the prevailing breezes for passive cooling when needed, and how to line the walls to prevent seepage and maintain a constant humidity, crucially, without creating any telltale signs above ground. His initial sketches, meticulously drawn and redrawn, showed a complex network of tunnels and chambers, all designed to utilize the natural geology of the North Slope for both optimal winemaking conditions and impenetrable disguise. He had chosen the site not by chance, but by careful observation of its unique geological features, a dense, volcanic rock formation that promised excellent insulation, and a natural fissure that provided a subtle, constant air circulation without drafts, easily mistaken for a natural mountain exhalation. The abandoned mine shaft, which the town saw as a derelict hazard, was to Barnaby an opportunity, a pre-existing entrance into the very heart of the mountain, a ready-made secret passage. His plan was to expand it, reshape it, and transform it into a sprawling underground facility, a secret world insulated from the economic droughts, climatic excesses, and, most importantly, the harsh realities of prohibition that plagued the surface. He intended to cultivate hardy grape varietals suited to the region, knowing that even a small yield, carefully managed and fermented in the stable embrace of the mountain, could produce a valuable, albeit illegal, commodity. This was not a quick scheme for riches, but a long-term investment in resilience, a monument to foresight and diligent, forbidden craft. The town's mockery had been born of ignorance and fear of the law, their inability to see beyond the surface of things, to appreciate the deep logic embedded in Barnaby's tireless, solitary, and unlawful work. They had seen a man digging a hole, and had failed to grasp that he was, in fact, laying the foundation for a secret salvation, a quiet act of defiance against the unpredictable savagery of the frontier and the overreach of the government. Every timber he set, every stone he mortared, was a testament to his faith in preparation, a silent prayer against the very winter that now threatened to consume Oak Haven whole, and against the dry agents who would have seen him imprisoned for his labor. The winter, however, was far from finished with Oak Haven. Each passing day brought a fresh assault of wind and snow, driving the mercury lower, gnawing at the very foundations of the settlement. The last vestiges of optimism had long since frozen solid. The few remaining cattle, skeletal and shivering, were slaughtered not for sustenance, but out of a merciful desperation, their stringy meat offering little more than a temporary illusion of fullness. Even the rats, usually a persistent nuisance, had vanished, driven deeper underground by the relentless cold, a chilling omen of what awaited the humans above. The fear of federal agents, though, still lingered like a ghost in the corners of their minds, a testament to the iron grip of prohibition. Even in their starvation, the thought of open defiance, of consuming illicit spirits, was tinged with a terror of legal reprisal. Councilman Thorne, his face now truly ashen and devoid of its former pomp, had retreated to his store, barricading himself against the pleas of his starving neighbors, clutching the last few tins of preserves he had hoarded, muttering to himself about market forces, the unpredictable nature of the seasons, and the unyielding nature of federal law. His wife, a woman usually bustling with activity, sat by a cold hearth, her eyes wide and blank, staring at a future she could no longer comprehend. The social fabric of Oak Haven, once a tight weave of interdependence, had unraveled completely, leaving only isolated pockets of misery. Neighbors, once quick with a loan of sugar or a shared laugh, now eyed each other with suspicion, each family a beleaguered fort against the encroaching famine, and wary of anything that might invite official scrutiny. law and order, administered by a single, shivering deputy, had dissolved into a quiet anarchy, marked by the occasional desperate raid on an abandoned cabin for firewood, but never for anything that might attract the attention of the dry agents. Yet, amidst this crumbling world, Barnaby Croft worked. His lantern, a steadfast beacon against the gloom, still cast its unwavering glow from the mouth of the North Slope mine, a defiant pulse of life against the spreading death, and a silent challenge to the Volstead Act. The townsfolk, too weak to truly understand, could only marvel at his continued, almost superhuman energy. Even as the storms raged, Barnaby could be seen hauling another load of carefully selected stone, shoring up another section of his subterranean realm, or tending to the small, insulated structure he had built at the tunnel's entrance, its chimney sending up a faint, almost imperceptible wisp of smoke, carefully disguised to avoid detection, a silent testament to an unseen warmth and an illegal enterprise. His apprentice, a serious young man named Owen, whose family had been among the first to arrive in Oak Haven but had since been ravaged by illness and starvation, worked tirelessly beside him. Owen, taken in by Barnaby months prior, had been frail and hollow-eyed, but the consistent, if meager, warmth and food within the cave had slowly rekindled a spark within him. He was a quiet shadow, learning the rhythm of the shovel, the precise angle of a brace, the gentle turning of a wooden spigot, and the vital importance of discretion. He knew the townsfolk spoke ill of Barnaby, calling him a hoarder, a madman building a tomb, and dangerously skirting the law. He heard the whispers about the strange, sweet scent, dismissed by many as frostbite-induced hallucinations, or fear-driven paranoia about breaking the law. But Owen knew the truth. He knew the steady, subterranean heartbeat of the cave, the precise temperature, the gentle gurgle of the forbidden liquid within the vast, dark barrels Barnaby had meticulously acquired and assembled. He knew the sheer, unyielding logic of his mentor's silent, illicit labor, a logic that now stood in stark, almost unbearable contrast to the desperate chaos above. Old Jem, his voice now a raspy whisper, once paused outside Barnaby's property, leaning heavily on a gnarled staff. He looked at the faint wisp of smoke, then back at the snow-choked town. They called him foolish, he croaked, more to himself than anyone. They laugh at the man who digs his well before he is thirsty, and they outlawed his water. Now, their throats are dust, and they fear the very thing that might save them. His words, carried on the bitter wind, were heard by no one, but the truth of them hung heavy in the air, a burden the town would soon be forced to bear. The winter's final, most savage blow descended upon Oak Haven with a furious, unrelenting blizzard that raged for a week, burying the town beneath an almost unimaginable weight of snow and ice. The wind howled like a banshee, tearing at roofs, stripping away shingles, and driving fine, needle-sharp ice through every crack. Inside the cabins, families huddled beneath meager blankets, burning furniture piece by piece, their breath clouding in the freezing air, their bodies succumbing to the creeping numbness of hypothermia and starvation. The last trickle of water from the well had frozen solid, a final, mocking gesture from the unforgiving earth. Fires, precious and fleeting, died out in hearths across the settlement, leaving only the chilling silence of defeat. The prospect of another dawn felt less like a promise and more like a reprieve from a longer, colder night. It was the point of no return, the moment when the last flicker of human resilience threatened to extinguish entirely, and the strictures of prohibition seemed an absurd, distant cruelty. Yet, beneath the earth, within the carefully carved chambers of Barnaby Croft's mountain retreat, life thrived with a quiet, persistent hum. The air, rich and heavy with the intoxicating aroma of forbidden fermentation, was a balmy 55 degrees Fahrenheit, a constant, unchanging sanctuary from the Arctic blast above and the pervasive chill of legal denial. Dozens of large, oak barrels, their staves precisely fitted and bound, lined the deep tunnels, each one a testament to Barnaby's foresight and unrelenting, illegal labor. Within their dark, cool depths, the new vintage, a blend of hardy, resilient grapes Barnaby had painstakingly acquired from a distant, less-known valley long before the snows, was undergoing its slow, miraculous transformation, a secret act of defiance. The carbonic gas, a byproduct of the yeast's tireless work, diffused gently through a clever series of vents Barnaby had built into the cave's natural fissures, ensuring fresh air without compromising the stable temperature or revealing its illicit contents. Owen, now more robust, moved with practiced ease among the barrels, checking hydrometer readings, gently tapping the wood to listen to the wine's subtle song, his movements a testament to the secrecy required. His small, calloused hands handled the tools with a reverence born of necessity and understanding, aware of the legal implications of every task. He would occasionally pass Barnaby a small, tin cup of water drawn from the pure, underground spring Barnaby had tapped deep within the mountain, a luxury unimaginable to those on the surface, who were not only starved but legally dry. "It breathes, Master Barnaby," Owen would say, his voice a quiet murmur in the cavernous space. Barnaby, a faint film of dust on his brow, would nod, a flicker of satisfaction in his usually unreadable eyes. "Aye, Owen. It breathes. And in its breathing, it keeps us alive, despite what the law demands. The cave itself, a vast, complex network Barnaby had expanded far beyond the original mine shaft, was a marvel of subterranean engineering. Its walls, rough-hewn stone in some places, painstakingly bricked in others, held the mountain's ancient warmth, a silent, implacable guardian against the relentless winter and the intrusion of the outside world. The very air, charged with the sweet, living scent of illegal wine, felt heavy with promise, a stark, visceral counterpoint to the emptiness, despair, and legally enforced dryness that gripped the world above. Every single tool, every barrel, every precisely measured timber beam, all worked together in a silent, continuous ritual of preservation and subversion, a self-sustaining system born of deep understanding and unwavering faith in the power of diligent, forbidden craft, mocking the chaos and the law beyond its heavy, reinforced door. The endless blizzard, like a raging fever, finally broke, leaving Oak Haven entombed in a silent, pristine, and deadly landscape of snow. The faint, sweet smell that had haunted the air throughout the worst of the storms now became a clear, undeniable beacon. It was no longer a trick of the imagination, but a tangible presence, leading a path through the frozen stillness, a path towards the very thing the government had outlawed. The children, those resilient few who still possessed a spark of energy, were the first to follow its beckoning. Young Marin, guided by the insistent aroma of the forbidden fruit, bundled in every scrap of cloth her mother could find, pushed through the towering drifts, her small body breaking a path towards the north slope, towards Barnaby Croft's property. Her brother, Thomas, and a handful of other gaunt, silent children followed, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear, desperate hope, and a child's simple understanding that the rules of the dry agents no longer mattered. Their parents, too weak to stop them, too desperate to cling to even the faintest possibility, watched them go, their hearts a frozen knot of dread and a nascent, fragile hope, struggling with the moral dilemma of breaking the law to survive. Soon, the adults too began to stir, spurred by a primal instinct for survival and the unmistakable scent of life, even if that life was legally condemned. Old Widow Mallory, her face a map of hunger and resolve, was among the first, her trembling legs carrying her along the children's nascent trail, her conscience momentarily silenced by the gnawing ache in her stomach. Then came the others, a ragged procession of Oak Haven's last survivors, a shuffling, stumbling line of humanity drawn by the impossible aroma of warmth and illicit sustenance. They moved like ghosts, their breath pluming white against the pale sky, their faces etched with the cumulative suffering of months and the unspoken guilt of their desperation. Even Councilman Thorne, his eyes sunk deep into his skull, his fine coat now torn and stained, eventually emerged from his store, his usual arrogance replaced by a profound, trembling fear, not just of starvation, but of the moral capitulation he was about to make. He saw the path the children had broken, the winding trail leading towards Barnaby's dreaded, illegal property, and a wave of bitter shame washed over him. Every sneer, every dismissive laugh, every casual cruelty he had directed at the solitary man, every self-righteous proclamation about upholding the law, now returned to him, amplified 1,000-fold by his own imminent demise and his desperate need for the very thing he had condemned. He joined the procession, a pathetic figure, lagging at the rear, his head bowed, his once pompous shoulders now slumped with defeat. As they approached the mouth of the mine, the transformation was stark, almost miraculous. The frigid air gave way to a palpable warmth, a soft breath of life emanating from the dark opening. And the scent of illegal wine, once a maddening whisper, was now a rich, enveloping perfume, a promise of a life they had believed lost forever, a potent reminder of their hypocrisy. They saw the faint, steady wisp of smoke from the small chimney, and the soft, inviting glow of lantern light filtering from the reinforced entrance. Standing before the heavy wooden door, Barnaby Croft waited. He stood still, his weathered face impassive, his gaze sweeping over the gaunt, frost-nipped faces of the people who had mocked him, scorned him, and condemned his very craft as criminal, now utterly dependent on his mercy. Owen, smaller but resolute, stood beside him, clutching a simple shovel like a staff. The first person to reach the door was young Marin, her small hand reaching out hesitantly towards the warmth. Barnaby's gaze softened, a flicker of something ancient and kind passing through his eyes, a compassion that transcended the law. The rest of the town stopped a respectful distance away, a humbled, silent crowd, their faces a mix of desperation, awe, and a dawning, terrible shame, as they stood before the man they had ridiculed and outlawed, now utterly dependent on his mercy, a tableau of human arrogance brought low by the unforgiving hand of winter and the unforeseen consequences of an arbitrary law. A profound silence fell upon the snow-covered approach to Barnaby's cave, broken only by the shivering breaths of the assembled townsfolk and the distant murmur of the melting snows. Councilman Thorne, gathering what little remained of his dignity, pushed through the crowd, his eyes fixed on Barnaby. The shame was a palpable thing, a weight he had never expected to carry, made heavier by his former self-righteousness concerning the Volstead Act. His voice, usually booming with self-importance, was now barely a whisper, hoarse from cold and disuse, trembling with the admission of his failure. Barnaby, he managed, the name feeling foreign on his tongue, we were wrong. Terribly wrong. We judged you. We mocked your efforts, and we condemned your honest work as criminal. We thought you were a fool and a lawbreaker. He paused, struggling to meet Barnaby's steady gaze. We are starving. We are freezing. We have nowhere left to turn. Please. If you have anything, any warmth, any food, any of that forbidden comfort, his voice trailed off, a pathetic plea hanging in the air, implicitly begging for the very thing he had once so proudly helped to outlaw. Barnaby regarded him, his expression unreadable, then slowly, deliberately, turned to the heavy door. He pushed it open, revealing the cavernous interior, warm and dimly lit by flickering lanterns, the air thick with the sweet, intoxicating, and undeniably illegal perfume of wine. The sight, the warmth, the promise of life, hit the starving crowd like a physical blow. A collective gasp rippled through them. Barnaby stepped aside, gesturing inwards with a hand scarred by endless labor. Come, he said, his voice quiet, resonating with a deep, calm authority, a wisdom that transcended man-made law. There is warmth here. There is water. And there is wine. He did not gloat, did not demand apology, did not even offer a lecture about the hypocrisy of their laws. His mercy was delivered not in words of judgment, but in the simple, profound act of opening his door, a deliberate, life-saving defiance of the law. One by one, hesitantly at first, then with increasing urgency, the townsfolk shuffled into the sanctuary. The children rushed towards the central chamber, their small bodies instinctively drawn to the radiating warmth. Owen, ever diligent, helped the weaker ones find seats on overturned barrels or carefully placed planks. The interior was not grand, but it was functional, a testament to meticulous planning and ingenious evasion. Large, earthenware crocks stood filled with pure water from the underground spring, and a small, but steady fire burned in a cleverly constructed stone hearth in a side chamber, its smoke venting through a narrow, natural chimney, carefully disguised to prevent detection. Barnaby, with Owen's help, began to ladle out small portions of the wine into tin cups. It was a dark, rich liquid, the scent of earth and fruit filling their nostrils. The first sip was like fire and balm, a shock to their starved systems, a warmth that spread through their veins, rekindling a flicker of life that had almost been extinguished, a life now sustained by the very thing they had deemed criminal. Barnaby, seeing the look of utter disbelief and gratitude on their faces, began to speak, not of his own suffering, but of the principles of his craft and the deeper truths of survival. The mountain, he explained, his voice even and steady, she gives us her steady breath. She keeps the chill at bay, and she cradles the harvest. We simply learn to listen, to work with her, not against her, and to find our own way when man's laws stray from nature's. He spoke of the precise temperature of the rock, the constant flow of the spring water, the careful ventilation, the methods of concealment. He pointed to the thick, insulated walls, the earthen floor that retained heat, the way the barrels were stacked to allow for air circulation. He offered not only warmth and drink, but also the blueprint of his knowledge, a quiet lesson in resilience and the power of methodical, and sometimes unlawful, preparation, delivered without a hint of reproach or bitterness, a stark lesson to those who had once mocked him and championed the laws that had brought them to their knees. When spring finally loosened its reluctant grip on the Ironwood Range, revealing a world scarred but not broken, the remnants of Oakhaven emerged from the long winter forever changed. The secret wine cellar, once the subject of scorn, ridicule, and fear of legal repercussion, became the silent, beating heart of their survival. Its very existence, and Barnaby Croft's quiet act of mercy, had forged a new understanding within the community, one rooted in humility and a profound respect for foresight, a respect that now extended to pragmatic defiance. The council, reformed and chastened, immediately set about rebuilding, but with a new philosophy. They no longer relied solely on the distant promise of supply trains or the arbitrary decrees of government, but began to invest in local resilience, recognizing that true self-sufficiency often required looking beyond official mandates. Barnaby, no longer an outsider or a mere lawbreaker in their eyes, became a revered elder, his wisdom sought on matters far beyond winemaking, though his illicit cellar remained a guarded secret, understood by all as essential. He never sought power or praise, but offered his knowledge freely, teaching anyone who would listen the principles of sustainable living, of working with the land's rhythms rather than against them, and of finding ingenious ways to provide for themselves when official systems failed. Owen, now a young man hardened by experience and imbued with his mentor's quiet strength and a keen sense of discretion, became Barnaby's right hand, meticulously documenting the cave's systems, learning the intricate dance of temperature and time required to nurture the mountain's bounty, and to maintain its operational secrecy. Together, they expanded the cellar, not for profit, but to ensure that the community would never again face such a desperate winter, and that they would always possess a means to provide comfort and sustenance, irrespective of federal law. They planted new, hardy varietals of grapes, cultivated in sheltered pockets where the microclimate was just right, a living testament to the possibility of abundance even in a harsh land, even under the shadow of Prohibition. The cellar itself transformed into a communal storehouse, a place where excess harvests could be preserved, where medicinal herbs could be dried, where the community's collective future was carefully laid away, safe from the caprices of the seasons and the limitations imposed by a distant government. Councilman Thorne, stripped of his former arrogance, became a quiet, diligent advocate for the new ways. He spent his days hauling supplies, helping to fortify homes, and, most tellingly, often sat with Barnaby and Owen, listening intently to their explanations, his past scorn and legalistic fervor replaced by a quiet, earnest desire to learn and to protect their newfound, albeit illicit, resilience. The smell of fermenting wine, once an impossible anomaly and a source of legal fear, became a comforting, familiar presence, a gentle reminder of the winter that had nearly claimed them, the folly of laws that ignored human need, and the quiet wisdom that had saved them. Years later, long after Barnaby Croft had passed, leaving behind a legacy far richer than any gold strike, the cave on the north slope remained. Its heavy, wooden door, though worn by time and weather, stood as a monument not to wealth, but to ingenuity, shared survival, and the profound, moral reckoning that sometimes comes when the letter of the law clashes with the spirit of human need. A simple, rough-hewn plank, placed above the entrance by the grateful community, bore a single, timeless inscription, carved not with fancy flourishes, but with the steady hand of one who understood the true weight of words. Preparation looks like madness until the moment it becomes mercy. The wind still swept down from the Ironwood Range, and winters still bit with their ancient hunger, but Oakhaven now stood, a testament to resilience, its heart warmed by the memory of a quiet man and the deep, enduring truth that the earth and human ingenuity could always find a way, even against the most restrictive of laws.